There is a Japanese word that does not translate cleanly into English. A word that carries the weight of centuries, whispered in temples, practiced by samurai, embodied by quiet people who endure more than they ever speak about. That word is Gaman, the strength of those who keep going even when life hits them harder than they expected, the invisible force of people who refuse to break even when everything around them collapses. Gaman isn't dramatic, it isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself with fire or excitement. It is the kind of strength that grows in silence, in small decisions, in lonely rooms where no one is watching. It is what remains when motivation dies, when hope weakens, when the future becomes blurry. Gaman is simply this: I will not break today. Imagine a single candle burning in an empty room. On the outside it looks peaceful, calm, still. But inside that tiny flame, particles collide and burst and rebuild endlessly. It is violent on the inside, but steady on the outside. That is how most strong people live. From the outside, no one sees the chaos, the pressure, the battles. People think you're fine, they think you're functioning, they think you're strong. But inside, the flame is doing everything it can to stay alive. And yet, like that candle, you remain standing. That is where Gaman begins. Not in victory, not in confidence, but in that tiny, stubborn decision to keep your flame alive no matter how much the world tries to blow it out. There was once a young man named Hiro. He had no great title, no remarkable achievements, no special gifts. What he did have was a quiet weight he carried every day: failure, disappointment, and the fear that he was becoming someone he didn't want to be. Every night, Hiro ran. Not because he loved running, but because it was the only place where his thoughts became less loud. One night, after failing yet another job interview, he stood at the start of a dark, empty road. He tied his shoes with trembling hands and began to run. Not fast, not with intensity, just forward. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, and the cold air stabbed his chest. Everything inside him begged him to stop, but he didn't stop. Not because he believed in a better future, not because he felt strong. He kept going for only one reason: he didn't want to quit on himself again. Hours passed, the moon shifted in the sky. The world slept peacefully while Hiro pushed through his own private storm. When he finally stopped, he collapsed onto his knees, exhausted and shaking. He didn't feel proud, he didn't feel like a champion, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he didn't lose. That small, private victory, the one no one saw and no one applauded, was Gaman. Not winning, not shining, just refusing to surrender your dignity. In modern life, many battles have no finish line. You run and run with no promise of success. But Gaman teaches something powerful. You don't endure because the finish line is near. You endure because your spirit is not for sale. Pain, in the philosophy of Gaman, is not an enemy. Most people treat discomfort as a sign to stop. If it hurts, they quit. If it's uncertain, they run. If it's difficult, they retreat. But pain is simply your limits introducing themselves. It is a quiet invitation to step beyond the version of yourself that you've always been. Pain says, "This is where most people stop." And Gaman responds, "This is where I begin." Pain becomes suffering only when you believe it means you are incapable. But to the Japanese mind, especially in old warrior traditions, pain was a teacher, harsh but honest. Across the city lived a woman named Aiko. Her life was simple, filled with responsibilities and long hours working at a small restaurant. She had a dream so small she never dared to tell anyone. She wanted to learn English, not for prestige or status, but so she could one day work abroad and send money home. After every exhausting shift, while others went home to rest, she walked to a public library. She sat at the same wooden chair in the far corner with her tiny notebook and taught herself 3 new English words each night. Some nights she barely kept her eyes open. Some nights the grammar made no sense. Some nights she cried silently because her mind and body were too tired to continue. But she came back the next night anyway. 1 year passed. She didn't become fluent. She didn't pass any major exam, but she could read signs she once ignored. She could greet customers in English with confidence. She could understand opportunities that once looked like meaningless symbols. Her progress was small, quiet, invisible to the world, but life-changing. That is the essence of Gaman, the strength to show up even when no one claps, no one sees, and no one cares. Aiko didn't study because she was strong. She became strong because she studied anyway. Real strength doesn't always roar. It doesn't always look impressive. True endurance is often disguised as small, consistent actions taken when you have every reason to stop. People search for intensity, passion, dramatic transformation. But Gaman grows in the quiet, in repetition. In tiny commitments you honor even when you're tired, discouraged, or overwhelmed. It is the strength to whisper, "Not today," quitting, and then doing the smallest thing that keeps your life moving forward. One page, one step, one attempt, one breath. That is where transformation begins, not in perfection, not in motivation, in silent, stubborn endurance. Gaman is not something you discover during the easy seasons of life. It appears when everything familiar begins to crack, when plans fall apart, when people disappoint you, when the future becomes a fog. It is the quiet strength that rises when there is no applause, no audience, and no promise that all of this effort will pay off. The world teaches people to chase inspiration, to wait for motivation, to look for passion. But Gaman teaches the opposite. Move even when you don't feel like it, do the work even when no one notices, and hold yourself upright even when your heart feels heavy. The people who master this are not loud, not flashy, not dramatic. They are calm forces of nature. They bend, but they do not break. There was an older carpenter named Ren who worked in a tiny workshop at the edge of a quiet street. He wasn't well known, and his shop wasn't fancy, but his work had a kind of soul in it. Every morning he sharpened his tools with slow, deliberate movements, repeating the same routine he had done thousands of times. One winter, tragedy struck when his son passed away unexpectedly. The workshop became silent. The tools remained untouched. The sawdust settled like snow. For weeks he barely spoke. Grief sat on his chest like a stone. But one morning, as the sun filtered through the dusty window, Ren walked back into the workshop. His hands trembled as he picked up his tools. He didn't work to distract himself. He didn't work to escape. He worked because it was the only way he knew to keep his heart from shattering completely. Each stroke of the blade was slow, heavy, raw. Some days he completed nothing. Some days he simply sat on the stool and looked at a piece of unfinished wood. But he kept returning, again and again, not to conquer the grief, but to endure it without losing himself. Years later, when someone asked him how he survived such a loss, he didn't talk about faith or philosophy or strength. He simply said, "I kept doing what my hands knew so my heart wouldn't forget who I was." That is Gaman. Not pretending everything is fine, not forcing positivity, but refusing to allow suffering to turn you into someone unrecognizable. People often think strength means not feeling pain, but real strength is feeling everything deeply and still choosing to move. There are moments in life where motivation doesn't exist, where hope feels thin, where you don't have the energy to fight. In those moments, Gaman steps forward quietly and says, "Then endure, not because it's easy, but because you are still needed in this world." You endure not to impress others, but to keep the light inside you from fading. There is a story told by an old tea master about a young student who asked how people maintain self-control in times of chaos. The tea master didn't answer immediately. He simply poured hot water into a cracked cup. The water leaked slowly, drop by drop. The student frowned, wondering what lesson was being taught. The master finally spoke. "Most people try to fix the cup before they pour, but Gaman teaches us to pour anyway, knowing some of it will be lost. Your effort matters even on days when nothing stays inside you." The student realized that some days you give your best and still feel like everything slips through your fingers. But that doesn't mean you stop giving. Modern life has trained people to expect instant results. If a dream takes too long, they quit. If progress is slow, they complain. If the road is long, they sit down and wait for a shortcut. But the Japanese concept of endurance is built on the understanding that not all progress is visible. Some victories happen entirely inside you. The world may not see the patience you built, the discipline you developed, the resilience you forged, the identity you strengthened. But Gaman is not meant to be seen, it is meant to be lived. Imagine a man climbing a mountain. Not a dramatic climb, not a life or death moment, just a slow ascent up a long, steady path. Some days he covers miles, other days he barely moves. Some days he must stop and simply breathe. But the mountain doesn't punish him for going slowly, and it doesn't reward him for going fast. The mountain only rewards one thing, the person who keeps moving. Life is the same. The speed never mattered. The size of your steps never mattered. Only your willingness to continue mattered. That willingness is Gaman. There is a quiet dignity in the people who endure without complaining. Not because they are emotionless, not because they are superhuman, but because they trust something deeper. The belief that strength is not something you wait for. Strength is something you create inside the very moments that try to break you. You become unbreakable not by avoiding hardship, but by walking through it with calm persistence. Gaman is not the strength of the loud or the proud. It is the strength of the ordinary person who keeps waking up, who keeps standing up, who keeps showing up, even when life feels too heavy to carry. These are the people who become unshakable, not by force, but by quiet endurance. There are moments in life when the world becomes so heavy that even breathing feels like work. Days when you wake up with a knot in your chest, when your thoughts move slower than your body, when everything feels slightly out of reach. These are the days people usually label as unproductive or wasted, but those who understand Gaman see something different. These aren't wasted days, they are testing days, days when life quietly watches to see whether you will bend or break. Everyone can move forward when life is smooth, but Gaman is revealed only when the path becomes steep, when you are tired, when you feel lost, and yet your feet still choose to take one more step. There was a university student named Kaito who carried a weight no one around him could see. He attended classes, submitted assignments, hung out with friends, and smiled when expected. But every night he walked back to a small apartment where his sick grandmother waited for him. She had raised him since childhood, and now he was the only one caring for her. He cooked, cleaned, helped her move, managed her medicine, and then stayed up late to study. His classmates assumed he was lazy because he often looked tired. His professors thought he was unfocused. No one knew the responsibility he carried. One winter, during exam season, his grandmother's condition worsened. Kaito barely slept. He made simple mistakes. He felt like he was drowning slowly. But he refused to complain, not out of pride, but out of love. One night after helping her to bed, Kaito sat at the small kitchen table staring at a textbook he couldn't absorb anymore. He felt the frustration rising. Why was life so unfair? Why did everything fall on him? Why couldn't he focus like everyone else? As tears blurred the words on the page, he suddenly realized something. The strength he admired in others was not born from perfect conditions. It was born exactly from nights like this. Nights when he felt too tired to continue but continued anyway. He wiped his face, took a deep breath and kept reading. He wasn't fast, he wasn't sharp, but he was trying. And in that moment he began to understand Gaman deeply. Sometimes endurance is an act of love, not ambition. When people think of the samurai, they imagine warriors with swords, armor, and fierce expressions. But the core of the samurai spirit was not aggression, it was endurance. They believed a person's true character was revealed not in battle, but in how they carried themselves in hardship. A samurai was expected to endure humiliation without losing dignity, endure pain without losing focus, endure fear without losing calm. Gaman was part of their spiritual training, the invisible armor they wore beneath everything else. It taught them that strength was not in overpowering others, but in mastering themselves. There is a story of a young samurai apprentice who was mocked publicly during his training. A senior warrior insulted him intentionally, trying to provoke a reaction. The apprentice felt anger rise in his chest like fire. His pride screamed to fight back. His ego spat curses in his mind. But he remembered a teaching his master had repeated many times: endurance is not weakness, endurance is control. So he bowed his head, accepted the insult, and walked away. Later, a friend asked why he tolerated such disrespect. The apprentice replied, "If I cannot endure a few words, how will I endure the weight of real battles?" His friend laughed and said he was too soft. Years later, during a real conflict, the apprentice became the warrior everyone relied on. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but the one who never crumbled under pressure. The modern world teaches people to react quickly, to defend themselves instantly, to argue, to prove a point, to show that they are not weak. But Gaman teaches patience. It teaches you that not every battle deserves your energy, and not every discomfort needs to be resisted. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who does not react, the one who breathes, the one who endures quietly until the storm passes, the one whose dignity remains untouched by chaos. Gaman is not about suppressing emotions or pretending to be fine. It is about holding your center, even while you feel everything. The Japanese do not see endurance as silence but as depth, the willingness to sit with your pain without letting it dictate your actions. It is the ability to continue living your values even when your circumstances are pushing you in the opposite direction. This is why people who practice Gaman seem unshakable. They are not unshakable because life is easier for them. They are unshakable because they have learned to continue even when life feels unbearable. There is a quiet beauty in the way people survive their private storms. There is honor in the single mother working 2 jobs to support her children. There is strength in the student who studies despite fear of failure. There is courage in the man rebuilding his life after losing everything. There is dignity in the person waking up every morning while fighting depression. These are the warriors of modern times, the ones who fight without swords, without armor, without recognition, and yet their battles are just as real. Their endurance is just as noble. Gaman is the thread that holds these people together. It is the discipline of staying true to yourself when life tries to twist you out of shape. It is the promise you make to your own heart, I won't abandon you, even when everything hurts. You may bend under pressure. You may feel moments of weakness. You may cry, doubt yourself, stumble and fall. But you rise again, not because you are fearless, but because you refuse to let hardship decide who you are. There comes a point in every journey where the hardest battle is not with the world, but with yourself. You reach a place where your legs still move, but your mind whispers, why continue? You look at the path ahead and feel nothing but exhaustion. You begin to question the point of enduring something that seems endless. This is the crossroads where most people turn back. But those who understand Gaman know that this moment, this exact moment of doubt, is where inner transformation actually begins. Because endurance without doubt is comfort. Endurance with doubt is strength. There was a middle-aged man named Sora who worked at a factory performing the same mechanical motions day after day. For decades he dreamed of starting a small business, something simple, a tiny cafe where he could serve tea and pastries. But dreams cost money he didn't have, time he couldn't afford, and courage he never fully found. The years passed until his life became a routine he could perform with his eyes closed. One morning, his factory announced cutbacks. Sora was among those let go. Suddenly, the routine he relied on was gone, and he found himself at a crossroads with nothing but fear and uncertainty. Most people assumed he would fall apart, but something awakened inside him, a stubborn refusal to let life define him through loss. He took a small loan, rented a cheap space and opened a tiny tea shop with only 4 wooden chairs and a single menu board he wrote by hand. The first weeks were silent, almost no customers came. The savings decreased, his confidence shrank. Every morning he opened the door with a forced smile, pretending he was not afraid. One night, as he cleaned the empty tables, he whispered to himself, "Maybe I made a mistake." His hands trembled as he turned off the lights, but the next morning he opened the shop again anyway. That simple act, opening the door even when fear told him not to, was Gaman in its purest form. Months passed, nothing changed quickly. But slowly, consistently, people began to notice. A passerby stopped in, a student brought a friend, a local office worker became a regular. The shop didn't explode with success, it grew like a tree, quietly, steadily, invisibly at first. Years later, the little tea shop became a warm community space where people came to breathe, study, think, and find calm in the middle of chaotic lives. When someone asked Sora how he survived all those months of emptiness, he said, "Because even when no one came, I decided to stay open. That was my victory." Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply not close the door on their own dream. Gaman teaches you that you don't need fast progress to justify your efforts. You don't need instant results to validate your discipline. You just need to continue. Life rewards those who remain open, open to possibility, open to change, open to struggle, open to being shaped by the very challenges they want to avoid. Strength does not come from winning. Strength comes from refusing to stop showing up. There is a truth that sits at the heart of Gaman, one that everyone eventually learns. If you endure the storms long enough, the storms eventually bow before you. Life cannot break a person who does not break themselves. Hard moments become chapters. Pain becomes memory. Struggles become stories you will one day tell with pride. And every moment you thought would destroy you becomes the exact moment that shaped you. When a Japanese potter repairs a broken bowl through kintsugi, they fill the cracks with gold, not to hide the damage, but to honor it. The bowl becomes more valuable, not because it remained unbroken, but because it survived. The same is true for people. Your cracks are not proof of weakness, they are proof of endurance. Every moment you endured quietly, every time you held yourself together while falling apart inside, every time you walked into the world carrying a weight no one else could see, you were practicing Gaman. You were filling your cracks with gold. And maybe that is the biggest secret of Gaman. The world doesn't decide who you become. Hardship doesn't decide who you become. Even failure doesn't decide who you become. You decide. In every moment that feels unbearable, you are quietly shaping the person you will one day call your future self. One day, you will look back on the night you nearly gave up and say, that was the moment I became stronger. Not because the pain disappeared, but because you endured it without losing yourself. So as you breathe right now, wherever you are, remember this. You don't need to be fearless to keep going. You don't need to feel strong to stand up again. You don't need to have everything figured out to take the next step. You only need to endure this moment, not tomorrow, not forever, just now, this breath, this step, this decision, because the people who refuse to break, even when everything inside them is tired, are the ones who eventually reshape their destiny. Gaman is not loud, it is not heroic, it is not dramatic, it is the quiet courage to continue. And if you continue, slowly, clumsily, painfully, you will become someone unshakable, someone who cannot be defeated, someone who has learned the oldest truth of all: storms pass, but those who endure become the mountains the storms break against. You have already survived things you once thought would destroy you. You have endured more than you speak about, and you are still here. That alone means Gaman has already begun working inside you. All that remains is to continue, quietly, calmly, unbreakably,